Good afternoon. This is Saturday, September 14th, and it is James and me. We are both here, but James, for a few moments, is behind the camera getting us set up. So while he does that, I do want to welcome you. And James will be leading the third section of our book, Cast, The Origins of Our Discontents by Isabel Wilkerson. And section 3 is the 8 pillars of caste. We'll do half of that today, and then the other half of that section 3 on Wednesday. So I hope you do have a book. I'll take a moment to center us. But here he comes, to the other side of the camera. Good to have you, James.
I hope I'm on there.
Do you want me to go to the other side of the phone and check to make sure?
Hold on. Let me just double check because it's oh, I think I would have cut myself off. There we go. Got to move this over. All right.
Okay. Thank you, James. So I'll take a moment to center ourselves. Good and gracious God, will guide us through this week. Let's take a deep breath. Breathe in the Spirit of God. And exhale all that tension you might have in your life now. Breathe in the Spirit of God. And once again, slowly exhale and try to find a way to relax. Breathe in deeply. Breathe in the goodness of God. And exhale. Amen.
Amen.
All right, James. Thank you. We begin.
Yeah. So
Page 99. Is that what page it starts on, this section?
I believe so. So we didn't end up discussing the second half of part 2 because of fire in our area.
Right.
But what we didn't discuss was we had a little bit of the comparison between the India caste system and the American caste system. So she discusses that. And then she also discusses how the Nazis used American laws as kind of the basis for their own racist laws. They sent people to study the Jim Crow in the South, and
Which I found completely startling.
yeah,
No idea.
yeah,
And she documents it well.
she does. And while we're not going to discuss this section, I just want to it's probably good, because if we start saying stuff about fascists, I might get myself in trouble.
Okay.
But
I don't know if you get yourself in trouble.
no, but there is on page 80 just a quote that I want to read.
Okay.
From Antifa theologian Dietrich Bonhoeffer.
Dietrich Bonhoeffer is, only I guess ministers have favorite theologians, but
Yeah,
he really has inspired me through the years.
yeah.
One of the best books I've ever read was The Cost of Discipleship.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, his quote here: "God will not hold us guiltless. Not to speak is to speak. Not to act is to act." And just as we get into this discussion, we are going to get into some ugly things in American culture and history.
Yeah, I found this third section, for me, not difficult to read because the writing's easy to read, but difficult to take in because of the content.
Yeah. Yeah. But because of the difficulty that we're getting into, Dietrich Bonhoeffer's challenge to us: God will not hold us guiltless. Not to speak is to speak. Not to act is to act. And there's this sense where we're talking about things that are kind of baked into the American project.
Right.
And if we don't raise our voice against injustice as it has happened, as it is happening, we are basically giving our blessing to it. So that's part of the reason why we're delving into this, even though it's difficult subject matter.
And there are others who said the same thing similar. Martin Luther King Jr. in his Selma, Alabama, where he was in prison and wrote Birmingham, Alabama. And wrote
I am
his letter.
sure he was in prison in Selma as well. But,
That's right.
But the letter from Birmingham jail is the famous one where he takes us white moderates to task.
Right.
So.
Right.
All right. So let's discuss this. This section. The title of our section is "The Origin of Our Discontents," which is also the subtitle of the book. Right. And it talks about these characteristics of the caste system. She calls them pillars, and we'll discuss 4 of them today briefly, and then you get the 4 hard ones on Wednesday. So, first up, the first pillar is divine will and the laws of nature. In order for a caste system to work, a lot of times God is marshaled as a blessing of the system. Mm-hmm. So she gives the example in India, the Dalits were, considered the untouchables, the unclean, and it's kind of baked into some of the Hindu religion. And in Christianity, as we are getting started in the U.S., there are scriptures that we pointed to that allowed us to justify the American slave trade. Mm-hmm. There is this quote about the curse of Ham, which isn't the reason why Jewish people don't eat pork, but it is the Noah's son,
right,
who embarrassed him when Noah was drunk, becomes cursed, and his descendants are cursed. And the theology gets into the dark-skinned people were the children of Ham, and I think a lot of that is because they go south in the end of Genesis 9, so they're identified as the people that migrate to the south.
And that's common for extreme groups to do that, to take a metaphor in the Bible and to spin it in a way that is going to force their opinion.
So there's this quote here in bottom of page 103, "The curse of Ham is now being executed upon his descendants. The great architect has framed them both physically and mentally to fulfill the sphere in which they were thrown. His wisdom and mercy combined in constituting them thus suited to the degraded position they were destined to occupy."
Right.
So I don't want to belabor this point, but I come from, my background is more a theologically conservative setting than you did. And I don't know anybody who thought this, but you could possibly find in a older family study Bible racist rhetoric in the notes.
Right.
And in fact, a lot of times when you get free resources for Bible study, a lot of those are dated, and they actually have some, by our standards, pretty racist and uncalled for language about certain subjects.
Yeah.
When I was in seminary, actually, I did an Old Testament ethics class where, this was our discussion would be to take an issue, and we would have a bunch of readings from different sources and then really debate the issue. And so slavery was one of the issues we looked at because it's a big theme throughout the Bible. and you have these readings, some of them, Civil War era, some of them earlier, of how people used the Bible to justify where they were coming from, and sometimes used the Bible pretty well. They were attentive readers.
Right.
But, I think they were wrong, but, so.
When I hear things like that, I always go back to what Jesus said was the most important commandment that he came to fulfill, which is to love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and to love your neighbor. And if it doesn't reflect your interpretation, that love of neighbor and love of God, then you've gone in the wrong direction.
This is a true saying worthy of all to be received.
What did he say?
This is a true saying worthy of all to be received.
Okay.
No,
I mean seriously, if it doesn't reflect that love, then your interpretation is messed up.
Yeah. So that's pillar 1. Pillar 2 is heritability.
Right.
And that means you inherit it. You inherit the caste that you are. And page 106, she distinguishes caste from class in the fixed nature. She says here, middle of the page.
Which page are you on?
106.
Okay.
It is the fixed nature of caste that distinguishes it from class, a term in which it's often compared. Class is an altogether separate measure of one's standing in society, marked by level of education, income, occupation, as well as the attendant characteristics such as accent, taste, manners that flow from socioeconomic status. These can be acquired through hard work and ingenuity, or lost through poor decisions or calamity. If you can act your way out of it, then it's a class, not a caste. Through the years, wealth and class may have insulated some people born to a subordinate caste in America, but not protected them from humiliating attempts to put them in their place or remind them of their caste position.
Right.
So this is kind of an important one, because people like to sometimes say we're in a post-racial society, because African Americans, and an African American has held the highest office in the land. We're free to move. The American dream was, if you work hard, you can get whatever you want.
Right.
Your nice home, you're with the white picket fence and the 2.4 kids. But the reality is there are people in our country that are still subject to humiliation when things don't go their way. And then they give this example of a NFL player, Desmond Merrill, who was put in a chokehold by the police.
Thrown down on the pavement.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, they turn him over and hold him down by the throat. He passes out under their weight. After the video went viral, an internal investigation was conducted.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I like this ending paragraph in that section. No matter how great you become in life, no matter how wealthy you become, how people worship you or what you do, NBR star James LeBron told reporters just the year before, if you are an African-American man or African-American woman, you always just be that.
Yeah. So, King James gets it right here. So,
King James gets it right there.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Pillar number 3, endogamy and the control of marriage and mating.
Right.
This is a lot about how if you are African American, there were laws on the books where you couldn't intermarry. Actually, laws going back to 1630, where
in laws that really hadn't been changed until well into my lifetime.
Yeah, 1967 is
right.
what she
I was
notes here.
7 years old. Right.
Wow, you're old.
Well, I'm just saying that it's been in my lifetime that these laws were finally changed, and some of them were they all. I think
Yeah,
The Supreme Court overruled
Supreme Court was
prohibitions.
1967,
Right.
but then it still took some time for that to work out into some
Right.
states. So I mean, this is really recent.
My first church was in the Piedmont of rural North Carolina, and I remember a conversation clearly with a family that was part of that town, took leadership in that town, and having conversations with them about interracial marriage, and they felt strongly that it was a sin. It was just ingrained within them, and that was in the 1980s.
Yeah, well, I mean, had a similar conversation with my grandfather, who wouldn't have put it as a sin category.
They called it a sin.
But he was of an older generation, and his feeling wasn't sin, but it was still being unequally yoked because the cultures would be so different.
Yeah, the excuse that I heard, even from a distant family, was that it wasn't fair to the children. And I really struggle with that. Maybe that was a cop-out of not embracing the new family.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and then I moved to Hawaii, and the half my friends were part white, part Asian. It was just like it was normal, but it was it is interesting here, and this kind of goes back to the section we didn't discuss. Is that she mentions that there were laws that said if you have like a drop of African American blood, you're African American.
Yeah, it became such a precise thing, and really the whole weird thing about it is
that was too extreme for the Nazis.
It was too extreme for Nazi.
Yeah.
But then she goes on to explain that you can't really even do that because we're all really so blended.
Yeah, yeah. All right, so and then we'll just kind of move along here. Pillar number 4. This is a longer section: purity versus pollution.
Right.
And so some of this, and there's this heartbreaking story of the kid that couldn't be in the public pool in Ohio.
That was so sad.
Yeah.
And the ramifications for that child, what it did to his person afterward.
Yeah. Whereas you can't mix African Americans and whites doing anything because they will contaminate one another.
Right.
And this section also gives us the history of like people trying to be declared white because of immigration laws that kept certain ethnicities out.
Right.
So, and we discussed this briefly, but there was the Indian fellow that, because he had Aryan heritage, tried to become white, and they were like, well, we might have the same distant relatives, but clearly, if you're around today, you can tell the difference. And they did not accept his petition. Right. And
she gives in this section so many examples. So many examples around water. I found.
Yeah.
The sanctity of water. She called it, didn't she?
Yeah.
The sanctity of water. Right.
Yeah. So I mean, so these are kind of, so these 4 pillars, we can see how that they've worked out, and I mean, she's building her case for how unsurmountable this is. But when you even if you look at these 4, the divine law being appealed to, having a caste as a hereditary feature.
Speaking of hereditary, I can remember hearing as a child, and this is in Massachusetts, so it wasn't in the South.
Yeah.
That black people sunk because their bodies were different. So it's just this kind of fables we live with. This false information that kind of reinforce that hereditary
that,
stuff.
that actually goes to the pollution side too.
How's that?
Well, if they stunk because their bodies were different, that's when you wouldn't want them touching you.
Right.
So I mean, it is a whole thing. But what she's saying is the force of this is that divine law, heredity features, endogamy, and this idea of purity and wanting to stay away from does kind of make it hard for social mobility.
Yeah.
So
what I thought was fascinating in this chapter, what we just mentioned briefly, was that laws look for trace amount of blackness in a person.
yeah.
Which, I mean, how could you even figure that out?
Well, I mean, and it got even more extreme because it used to be if you had black features, then you were black. But if you didn't have the black features, well, how can we say you're still black? So then it became more stringent in terms of how they applied this. So, so going back to Bonhoeffer's comment, God will not hold us guiltless. Not to speak is to speak. Not to act is to act. Mm-hmm. And this has been kind of a reality that America has lived in. And, as followers of Jesus, and it is the time for us to raise our voice and say, nah, no, this is wrong.
Right,
so,
right.
Well,
thank you, James.
Yeah, so you want to give some final words?
So next week we'll be doing Pillar 5, occupational hierarchy, and
Wednesday.
What was that now?
Wednesday. You said next week, but
right, Wednesday. Excuse me, Wednesday. And then what else is in that section? Well, I'm looking for it, James. But
so we have.
Yeah. Dehumanization and stigma, terror as enforcement, cruelty as a means of control, and then finally inherent superiority versus inherent inferiority.
Yeah. If you're reading along, this is a heartbreaking section. So
beware.
Be aware, and we will discuss it with fear and trepidation.
James, thanks for doing double duty today, filming and being a participant.
Thank you, and we'll see you next time.
Signing off. Bye-bye.